Good evening, my name is Matthew Ogden, and you're watching our weekly broadcast from LaRouchePack.com featuring Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. Today is March 7th, 2014, and I'm joined by Megan Beats in the studio today for our webcast. Now, I'm going to begin by referencing a series of appearances that Mr. LaRouche has made on Russian television this week, practically every day this week. Including a very substantial prime-time segment that was aired last night on Vesti 9 o'clock evening news on Russia 1, which is the second largest television station in Russia. This segment was titled, Lyndon LaRouche Says the USA Relies on Nazis in Ukraine. And it featured an interview with you, Lynn, in which you stressed that the Nazi operation, which is being carried out by the Obama administration in Ukraine, is part of a much larger intention to break Russia, using Ukraine as the point of vulnerability to first bring down Russia as a means of crushing any other opposition to their bankrupt transatlantic system that would emerge from Eurasia as a whole. Now, at the same time that Russian television has decided to play up Mr. LaRouche's voice very prominently in this way, very high-level members of the Putin government are also directly echoing his analysis. Today, Vladimir Yakunin was quoted extensively in an article in the Financial Times titled, U.S. Accused of Trying to Destroy Russia. And the article begins by saying, a close ally of Vladimir Putin has accused the U.S. and, quote, a global financial oligarchy of organizing the overthrow of power in Ukraine to destroy Russia as a geopolitical opponent. They then quote Yakunin directly, who says, quote, we are witnessing a huge geopolitical game in which the aim is the destruction of Russia as a geopolitical opponent of the United States or of this global financial oligarchy. He said that the events in Ukraine are part of a scenario to create a world government, and states that the realization of this project is in line with the concept of global domination that is being carried out by the U.S. We saw this in Iraq, we saw this in Afghanistan, we saw it in Yugoslavia and in North Africa. Today, the borders of carrying out this doctrine have moved to Ukraine. And then Mr. Yakunin cites the process of NATO encirclement of Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union, saying that this is a direct violation of the agreements that Chancellor Kohl had with Soviet leader Gorbachev, that the exit of Soviet troops from Germany would not lead to NATO's approach towards Russia's borders. He said, in reality, everything that has happened is the exact opposite. And then he cites that Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote back in 1996 that with Ukraine, Russia is a great power. Without it, it is not. And Yakunin says this is not a new idea. More than 40 years ago, when the U.S. developed plans for the destruction of the Soviet Union, CIA documents said it should be accompanied by the separation of Ukraine from Russia. And then he ends his comments by challenging the West to see if they could create legitimate organs of power without the participation of armed men and fascist elements. So it's very clear that what Mr. LaRouche has said on Russian television this week is being picked up and echoed by leading elements of the Russian government. I'd like your comments, Lynn, on the strategic significance of having appeared on Russian national television, along with Vladimir Yakunin's remarks about this global financial oligarchy, which is behind the effort to destroy Eurasia.
Well, the problem is the question of the British Empire, and the Russians, of course, have a defensive posture in terms of what's going on and pose their position as such and pose their defense. But we have a larger area to cover. What we're talking about is the entire human species, not just crushing Russia or parts of Asia. And the Queen has been quite obvious in this thing. She's repeatedly, ever since the period of the Copenhagen discussions about population reduction and the green policy, she has called for genocide. She said we have to reduce the human population rapidly from about 7 billion people estimated to less than 1. Now that is precisely what is happening, and it's what the green policy represents. But there's another aspect to this. The key thing here was that in order for the British Empire to consolidate this kind of policy, which the Queen is represented, remember she came in this period. She was part of the launching of this policy. And she's evil. This woman is evil. She has a record of evil which is matchless. I think her husband was probably more evil. And some other people on the Dutch side were even more evil, because the Dutch are more experienced at evil than the British were. Because it was the Dutch who committed the slaughter against the Irish. So the Dutch are really the oldest evil that we know that's around today. And this is what they mean by Dutch treat. It does mean that often. All right, so the point is, what's happened is something much more interesting. Something that's much more up my alley, shall we say, which I've been forecasting for a long period of time. Actually, my forecasting career in a public function goes back to 1964, where I made a forecast in that year, and I gave February the following year. This was done in the summer of that year. I forecast for the following year on a particular 3 dates, and stated exactly what would happen within the range of those 3 dates. And those 3 dates did happen. So it was my successful experience of that, which in that capacity, when I was then an executive for a national consulting agency. And naturally the FBI came down on me after that one, and the FBI went to work on me, and I lost that position. And I did other things, but I've been forecasting at least about 5 major times of forecasting, or world events have been involved in my forecast. So I'm very good at that. I'm very good at that, not because I'm so good, but because other people are so bad and so stupid. They unfortunately have a wrong kind of college education and training, so they don't understand. The point is that history is a process. It is not events. It's not little pebbles rolling around on some kind of skating floor or something. It's a process. It's a lawful process, which does not lie within the individual will as such. The individual will of the human being is shaped. Now, to some degree, if we're human beings, we don't believe in said certainty. If we're human beings, we believe that mankind has a noetic capability to create the future as a willful act, not by deduction, but by principle. And there are very few people, even in scientific fields, who are able to think in terms of principle. They think in terms of mathematical deduction and try to project the history of the universe into the future from the standpoint of mathematical deduction. That method is not only wrong, it is stupid. Because man is not an animal. And this goes with the same people who teach us that we have to learn from statistics. They're idiots. Every statistician I've up against on this kind of thing proved themselves. In an encounter with me, they were idiots. The big one is, of course, in the summer of 1971, where I'd been forecasting that this was going to happen in the immediate future during the 1970s. I was forecasting that in the 1968 period, and it happened. They were all surprised in this whole summer of that year, from the beginning of summer up to the end of the year. We had finally they broke. They were confronted by the fact everybody was saying that I was right and they were wrong. That is, honorable people. So they had this meeting. They called in the biggest jerk they had in economics for Britain. They brought him into Queen's College in New York City. And I had a debate with this creep. He's a complete slog. And in the end of this debate, which I conducted against most of these people who were gathered at Queen's College in this lecture, debate actually, and he, damn fool, said, but if then history would that Hitler would not have been necessary. That was, if this reformist, Hitler would not have been necessary. And a great groan came out of the entire audience, the entire body assembled there, because they knew that's what he meant. They knew what he said was true of what the intention had been, but they were shattered by the fact that the poor bloke admitted it. And the room just went, we had the whole thing was a protracted discussion. It went on beyond the time we had the university auditorium available. So we had to transfer to this smaller quarters and eliminate some of the onlookers. So, and then he said, sitting in his chair there, when I was standing and addressing the thing, did my turn, he said, but Hitler would not have been necessary. And that this poor bloke was telling the truth from the standpoint of what his belief was. But he forgot that the American audience is not as stupid as the British one. He could have gotten by with that in a British economic conference. They would have said so. They would have agreed. But he was on our territory, and he didn't know how to speak American. He was too busy thinking in English terms. So it made a fool of himself. So the point is, what the problem here is, the essential problem, and which is the strategic. How can you know the future? Huh? By not being stupid. By not believing in mathematics. By realizing that mathematics is a defective method. It's an approximation for deductions, for deductive methods. But it's not science. And so most people who are called scientists, especially economists, are not scientists. They're accountants. And you can't trust an accountant. That is, in making a judgment. They have no understanding of the scientific principles involved. I'm a fluke in this thing that I understand science. I don't believe in mathematics. I believe in science. I believe in physical science, not just as a static thing, a mathematical creature, but as a process of, in the history of mankind, from the beginning of the known history of mankind, at the first time explorers and archaeologists discovered that man cooked his own food. Animals do not cook their food. No animal cooks its own food, at least not willingly. They may be helped by the local butcher or something like that, but otherwise it doesn't happen. Because mankind actually has what's called a noetic characteristic, which is beyond the capacity of the brain by itself. That is, the animal brain and the human brain have a difference in them. The animal brain has no ability to see the future, or to foresee the future. The human being does. The human being uses fire. Now, it goes beyond fire. We call it chemistry in general. The whole history of man's progress is a history of chemistry, of inventing states of nature which are chiefly artificial, that is, man-made, which do not occur ordinarily in nature without man. And all the great progress of mankind has come in that nature. Now, it's on that basis that's what my specialty is in this thing, is that, to say that deduction is stupid. And I never accepted Euclidean geometry. Most of the people that went to my schools and went into my university were idiots. Even some of the talented scientists who I worked with in the 1970s, they were still in the idiotic belief of deductive method. They still were this is crap, because they were taught that. They were taught that in their high school. They were taught that in their university school education. They were taught in their graduate programs coming out of universities. They were taught that in the laboratories in which they worked. And some of these were brilliant in terms of their laboratory work, in terms of experimental work, as long as you didn't get them going to the blackboard and trying to explain something. They could tell you exactly how the experiment worked. They had made discoveries, honest discoveries, but they had not been able to socialize that. But they thought that when they got up and talked to explain something they had sort of impulsively understood as scientists, they lost their scientific credibility in their own mind. Once we had a couple of these guys, they go to the blackboard to present an argument. You lost them. You lost them. because his blackboard explanation, which he thought was going to prove that this was scientific because it seemed to be effective, was wrong. So the problem here is global in the fact that we have so few people, including the highest ranks of educated people in the United States, with very few exceptions, do not understand this. For example, you had a recent publication on the human brain. It was a complete piece of nonsense. Absolutely nonsense. The human brain is very important to us. But it's not the brain as such that does it. There's something else, an ingredient has been added to it. A creative, a noetic characteristic which does not exist in any part of the animal kingdom. And that's the difference between human beings and others. Now, how does humanity exist? We start out, and people say, well, aren't they just apes? Now, I've met some nice apes, like gorillas, in the mountain gorillas. I've studied those things a bit. Now, they are very nice animals. You know how they mate? The female comes up behind them, wraps them on the back, and that's how it starts. She makes the proposal with a pound on the back. So the old slug comes, okay, I do it, right? But in general, the beasts do not have any sense of the future. They don't have any sense of noetic characteristic. But man, who, according to some accounts, was living in certain ways, they say, well, that's just like the monkeys, or that's like the apes. But it wasn't. Mankind cooked its own food. And from the use of fire, Prometheus, fire, mankind has grown. And the growth can be measured in terms of chemistry. By chemistry, we mean the creation of states in nature which are not otherwise existing in nature. That the human mind, for example, when people die, say when a great scientist dies, like Max Planck or Albert Einstein, what's happened? Well, what they discovered, which is an efficient principle. The principle itself is an active principle. The use of that principle will cause something to happen that will never otherwise happen. And that's how you can forecast. That's how I have made every forecast I've made. Why I've been successful, which all these other forecasters I've known as rivals never were able to do. I've never run up against a scientific forecaster who, out of that itself, sometimes these guys are brilliant in doing the scientific work in the process of making discovery, but they are stuck. Unlike a few great people, like Planck, for example, or Riemann, or go back earlier to the Renaissance period, you find people who really understood the principle of creation. That creation is a principle which exists only in the mind. Now, you look at the history of man. Take Brunelleschi, and we've been talking about him recently among ourselves again, and Coulson, or Kepler. Kepler and these people made discoveries which changed the future of mankind. And it's the ability to understand what changes and what destroys the future of mankind, which is really what the intellectual development of the human mind must be. Because when people like great discoverers, like Coulson, or Brunelleschi, or Riemann, Gauss, so forth, every one of these people changed the course of history for mankind, changed the definition of what is the species meaning of mankind. We are now going to take over the moon for our use. No, we're not going to live there. We're going to take over the asteroids which threaten us often in the area. We're going to mine them. We're going to develop the ability to do that. And therefore, by understanding history in these terms, in terms of what's called the noetic principle, that is the existence of principles which cannot be reached by deduction. And that's the difference between genius and stupidity. For example, as I say, when a great scientist like Planck or Einstein die, they don't die. They are able to do nothing on their own from the moment they're dead. But it's not the brain that's just the problem. The problem is that the discoveries they make and the demonstrations of discoveries that they effect determine the future of mankind, predetermine the future of mankind. Science is the discovery of the future, the discovery of a principle that lies only in the future. That is the difference between mankind and the ape. Otherwise, people do act like monkeys much of the time, or at least apes. They're better off. So, therefore, we have as human beings the ability to create the future. If we don't believe in that, then we're stupid. And the problem is that mathematics makes people stupid. You can use mathematics for retrospective work, for hauling out the garbage and things like that. But it's no good for creating the future. If people who try to deduce everything mathematically, create everything mathematically, are in the end idiots. Gauss didn't do that. Do you know that Gauss never explained to most of his people? He never explained publicly how he had made each and all of his discoveries? Riemann was a little more expositive on this thing. He said, so the reason I was able and have been able to deal with the future is because I'm committed to this principle. And other people fail. Why? Because they were trained not to do this. They were trained to use deductive methods. So therefore, I've been in the position now, because I have been working this kind of investigation on a global scale for most of my life. And it has been over 70 years. You know, when you get over 50 years of experience in high-grade forecasting, and are able to forecast again and again the history of mankind over finite and predetermined intervals, how are you able to do that? Because mankind's life is determined by the way principles are applied, and determined also by the constant demand for the discovery of new principles. So if mankind sticks to one principle, as you would say from chemistry, you take the history of chemistry, what does chemistry allow you to do in its existing population form? For example, now, we thought we had the table of elements as a fixed system. It's no longer that. It's an endless one. And it's based on more and more discoveries. The discovery of the system of elements was actually a very important discovery. But it was not the end of anything. It was only the beginning of the end of something else, something beyond. And so the issue is that mankind's existence depends upon, as we saw in the case of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, people from England, from Europe, Dutch and English largely at that time, came into North America and created a civilization whose technology was advanced of the technology of Europe. Benjamin Franklin was one of the greatest inventors in Europe, and he was only a visitor. He was ahead of all the slouches of others. And so these are the kinds of factors we have to consider. And the problem is, as long as people believe in stupidity, that is, believe you cannot know the future, you cannot, by knowing the future, take actions which will change the future, you are not competent to lead society. And we have a political system now, we have a school system, we have a university system, which turns people into relative idiots from a scientific standpoint. They don't create, they deduce, or try to seduce, this kind of thing. And so that's where we stand. Now, what's happened is that you have, in various parts of the world, you do have a handful of people who are generally called geniuses. They're called geniuses not because they're of any special quality that they do have. They're called genius because they can do what others can't. And the others can't because they believe in mathematics. Mathematics is useful for counting the number of idiots in your quantities. The individuals are conveniently individuals. except when they become certain kind of psychosis. But the typical idiot is a good idiot. They belong to what they know, what they believe in, what they can deduce. They believe what they can deduce. You tell them somebody's going to crash tomorrow. How do you know that? You couldn't know that. Nobody can know the future. How many times have you heard those voices? No one can know the future. Well, buddy, I do know the future. And knowing the future is a science. And it can only be done as a science in particular, systemically. And therefore, the question is, are we going to be able to mobilize for science rather than warfare? That's the challenge. And since what's happened is in terms of what's happened with me in Russia, and I haven't talked much to them for many years, just off and on. But suddenly they got shocked. And what shocked them was the fact that I knew something which they were not hesitant to know too. They still don't know how I forecast exactly, but they understand the existence of the principle. And the question is, we've come to, as I say, the most important thing that I've been saying is we must get rid of Obama. Why? Because he's an agent of the British Empire. And we must cause the extinction of the British Empire as a precautionary measure to ensure the continued existence of the human species. The British Empire must be shut down. It can no longer be allowed to exist. It's a threat to all humanity, to the human species. And the human species must demand that the British Empire be shut down. But in the meantime, what this means also is we can no longer have warfare, general warfare. There may be police actions, regulation, but they really are like police actions, where wrongdoers are told don't do it anymore, or else. But the question is, what has been stopped is progress. And the Queen, who is by her definition of her function, is the most evil creature slithering around on this planet. There's no mass murderer, there's no criminal who is not worse, less than worse than the Queen. She and her institution must be shut down. And the future of mankind depends upon that action. Obama is nothing but an instrument of that Queen. He's a nothing. If you look at him closely, he has no significant intelligence. He has only evil in him. There's nothing in Obama that's ever done which is anything but pure evil. So the Queen picked a dumbhead, and he is a dumbhead. He goes into strange mental states, as one of our members has noted at close quarters. When you confront him, he goes, and he gets confronted, he goes crazy. He starts speaking in different accents. He goes into different modes of expression. He's actually a psychotic on the edge of exploding himself. And that's what happened with one of our members who confronted him. And he disintegrated right before their eyes. He went through phase changes. He's a psychotic. The president is a psychotic. That's what a psychotic does. They try to appear normal, and then when you push them the wrong way, they go into a psychotic fit. And that's what he did. On public television. On public television. The man is a psychotic. He should be put in a place where psychotics are carefully taken care of. He shouldn't be president. He should find the insane asylum which will do some good for him. But that is what the issue is we're faced. The face is, we do know, I have proven it again and again how you know this. I know exactly how it works. We've come to the issue now. We have to get the Queen of England out of business. We have to throw Obama out of business. Put him in a gentle insane asylum with strong walls. And feed him regularly, but not too much. He might get sick. I don't know if he knows how to eat properly or not. Anyway, but that's the issue before us. The issue is, if you ask the question, how do we prevent this from happening? The answer is, it lies in the power to shape the future. It does not lie in deductive methods. It does not lie in regulation. It lies in creation of the means which the history of mankind defines. Mankind has gone through states of progress, despite the Zeusian conception, despite the Roman Empire, and now despite the British Empire, because the British Empire is nothing but a relic created, modeled explicitly on the Roman Empire. So we have a new Roman Empire, the British Roman Empire. That must be shut down, because the most effective evil of the British Empire is that it destroys science systematically and introduces fake science, which is deductive or descriptive science, not science. And now we have with the case with Russia, we have the case with China is a nation which is moving upward in the area of innovation and creativity. There are forces in India which have the same intention. There are other forces throughout the world who have to have the same intention, but they're in a minority, or put into a minority by evil governments, or by stupid governments. And sometimes stupidity is the greatest evil of all, because it's a stupidity that turns a human being into a monkey speaking English. That's our problem. And that's the issue that we have to face. I cannot simply stand here or in any similar state and say, this is wrong. Because saying it's wrong is not enough. When you've got a sick person who has no ability to save their own lives, you call in for a physician, for a cure for the disease. Ignorance, human ignorance, is a disease. We live in an ignorant society. We live in a society in which most people are ignorant. And our education system doesn't provide much help for that sickness. Therefore, we have to go, what's our solution? We've discussed it on this panel before. We now have, west of the Mississippi River, we have an area of the United States in particular, which is going to die. The whole area, California, Texas, all those states which used to produce all your food, the water is going away. The crops no longer exist. The cattle are dead, slaughtered, are not replaced. The food stock is being destroyed. The greenies are killing whatever food stock we have. Fracking in the western states is destroying the ability to even get water. These are the realities we face. It's not complaining against doing something wrong. That's not it. It's a failure to do what is right. Because we can, with the aid of methods of thermonuclear fusion, enhanced perhaps by helium-3 methods, we can, within a decade or slightly more than a decade, we can begin to make major headways by these technologies. And by knowing that we have these technologies coming, we can then adapt ourselves to management of water management systems in the western part of the United States and otherwise. We can save the people of the United States. But the measures we have to take will require us to get to a certain goal, and that goal is thermonuclear fusion and thermonuclear fusion programs. With that, because the sun is going to be, for an extended period of time, going to one of the deepest periods of its recent existence. And people otherwise in the United States are going to die en masse, especially in the region of the western states, western Mississippi, unless we do something about it. So the cure does not in removing something, except removing Obama and removing the greenies, canceling the green policy. One sweep of the Constitution passed through the Congress says the green policy is hereby canceled. It's terminated. We're going back to thermonuclear fusion and the powers which will enable mankind to deal with the problems that threaten his existence now. So the problem is not removing bad people. That has to be done often. But that's not going to be the solution for the future. The solution is going to have to be in the form of the equivalent of progress, of discoveries of principle, It's going to be based on the human being, as they did in World War II, coming out of the terrible depression, and what Franklin Roosevelt represented. We're going to go and take advanced methods in science that exists. We're going to discover new ones to supplement that, as we did under Franklin Roosevelt. We're going back simply to that kind of mentality of leadership of government in our United States. And that's what our mission has to be. And otherwise we have to cure ourselves. We have to cure ourselves of the belief in mathematics. Because mathematics, for example, in music, why do you have bad music? No more classical music. No more classical education in music. Huh? That makes people stupid. Popular music makes Americans stupid, incapable of managing their own lives. Puts them into drug habits, susceptibility to drug habits, all these kinds of things. When you have to be a scientist and have to deal with scientific problems of nature in order to save mankind, you cannot be a drug addict. So perhaps we ought to export all drug addicts. Or tell them to cut the crap out. So the point is, we cannot simply, on the one hand, as we have to deal with this war threat. The danger of a thermonuclear war, which, if it occurs, and Obama's presence as president, can cause the extinction of the human species in a very short period of time. All it takes is one thermonuclear war between the Eurasian section of the world and the transatlantic section. A thermonuclear war between those two bodies will cause the extinction of the human species. Maybe not all at once, but the effects, the after effects of what does survive will not survive. And therefore Obama must go. This is not an option. Anyone who's not going to throw him out of office is not fit to occupy any important position in government.
Okay, Lynn, so the next question comes to us from Keisha Rogers, who on Tuesday got 21% of the vote in the Democratic primary for Senate in the state of Texas, which was enough to keep her in the runoff election, which is scheduled to occur on May 27th, despite the best efforts of Obama and the Texas Democratic Party. So Keisha asks the following question. This week, we issued a major upset here in Texas to the Democratic establishment, to Wall Street, and to Obama, with my campaign advancing to round 2 of the election, going into an 11-week runoff against my millionaire bought and paid for opponent, who, with all of his money, could not succeed in averting a runoff. The lashing out against me, coming from the Obama teams in Texas and nationally, clearly indicates their weakness and vulnerability. Now is the time to escalate. The initiation of a cooperation and integration of my campaign for U.S. Senate in Texas, along with Michael Steagall's campaign in California against Nancy Pelosi, on the issue of the devastating drought impacting both of these states, and the implementation of the solutions around great projects such as NWAPA, will represent a critical flank in escalating the importance of our 2 campaigns. Michael and I will be in California this weekend together, participating in a campaign event for the Steagall for Congress campaign. We will also take part in discussions at the California Democratic Convention being held in Los Angeles. I would like to get your input on the importance and strategic significance of our campaigns in addressing this current crisis.
Well, my approach was twofold. First of all, Keisha's campaign, we've been running campaigns for her repeatedly. And she's a very good campaigner. She's been a very effective campaigner, probably one of our own most effective campaigners. But then we get into this period where the recent several years, the sun has changed its characteristics. It has gone into a quiet phase, which means that the radiation which is hitting the relevant parts of the entire planet are going into a crisis period, into a desertification. Now, you know that in west of the Mississippi is the greatest part of our actual growth of food supplies and so forth now, crops and so forth. Now, with the aid of fracking, which is largely a British act, it should be immediately, the United States should suddenly terminate all fracking in the United States or associated with it. No fracking. Because fracking is, the effect on the human humanity, under especially these conditions, is murderous. You have people, through fracking, they're trying to draw water out of a faucet. And if you light a match, it burns. Fracking. And the presidency of the United States is all fracked up. So therefore, we've come to a point where we have to say we have a national policy. And when I got into this thing, I said, well, look, we got two areas here we can work with, two constituencies. And one of them was based on Keisha, because Keisha has been a successful candidate for state office repeatedly. She's one of the leading candidates in that state in terms of her durability, in terms of her reach, in terms of the influence on the people she represents. She's also a very bright person, an extraordinarily bright person, very talented and very devoted. And those are values you find very rarely among today's politicians. She's probably one of the best qualified people for election you have around in the United States today. She has those kinds of qualities, and only the fact that piggish little people and small-minded idiots don't want to appreciate what her great capabilities are, her devotion is. Then we had the other state. Well, we've got California. California and Texas are the largest states of the Union of the United States. California has been one of the most luscious and successful parts of the United States economy. Texas has had a great interest and has some dry areas there which are not exactly encouraging. But you take the population of Texas and California, you've got the biggest voting bloc that you can assemble in the United States. And these two states are key to what can be done for the other states, because we have to have a federal policy that addresses this question. And the place to start is take two states, California and Texas, which have been the largest states, the most important states in the United States in terms of our economy. And everybody else in the West is tied into that crossfire between Texas and California. So why do we do that? That's what the challenge is. The challenge is we have to focus on that. And therefore, actually, what she represents and what he represents represent a quality of leadership who represented in states which are among the most important states in the United States. Which means we have a group of people who can ignite a new revolutionary movement economically in the United States. Now that means we're going to do that, we have to go the greatest massive effort of water management among those states. We're going to have to shut down the flow of water out of Alaska into the Pacific Ocean. We're going to have to move that water to force it to go back through the inside of North America. That will be a major source. There are other things, conservation dams and other features why we can restore water, rehabilitate it. So there are things we can do which in a certain minimal way can stop the bleeding. Not permanently, but maintain a war. To fight a war, say a 10-year war, to save the United States. We fought 10-year wars. We fought one in Indochina, which we never should have fought. We wasted a lot of people in that effort. But this is a war to save the United States by taking the vulnerable part of the United States, the equivalent of Ukraine for Russia. Take the most vulnerable part of your country. Defend your country there, as was done in World War II. Defend your country at the place where it's most threatened. And that defines your mission in life, your mission at that time. So now what we have is Texas and California are the equivalent of what they did in the Soviet Union in defending against the Nazis. You pick, in each case, a crucial point of vulnerability. You deal with defeating that crucial point. Now here we have two crucial points. And that becomes our policy. And it becomes a policy because we have China, which is affected by this, but this is something that China needs to have happen in its territory. India needs this. The United States as a whole needs it. Without that, Western Europe will not survive. Western Europe is today a burgeoning graveyard of diminishing number of people. So therefore, the principle is like a military strategic principle. You don't go out and shooting people rapidly. You go out and you find the enemy that you have to defeat, which will topple the whole problem you're facing. So we don't want any more merely political or debates. We want strategy. We want strategic measures which are based on insight into the future and are judging what the future will be for us by looking at the things which allow us to make the future happen. Like winning a war in a strategic point. You fight the war not to take that territory. You fight the war in order to prevent a chain reaction of catastrophe around the nation as a whole, or the world as a whole. And that's what she's doing. She is being a leader of the United States where most of the Senate isn't worth anything. She's a leader in terms of the nation and among a nation which are people who don't do really anything that's going to do any good. So we have to take people like that from among our candidates and among our representatives, and we have to encourage them to exert leadership where they can exert it. I'm looking particularly for strategic points, crucial points of strategy. But above all, we're going to have to do, as I said just before in my longer remarks this evening, we have to concentrate on the mission orientation for the future. We have to understand, but to do that, we must go back to the same principle I raised before. We have to think about what is creativity. Most people in the Congress haven't the slightest idea of what even the word means.
This is a question on shutting down Wall Street. This question comes from a Washington-based institution, and it reads as follows. Mr. LaRouche, in a recent article, former IMF chief economist Simon Johnson cited new warnings by FDIC Vice Chairman Thomas Honig about another looming blowout of the global banking sector. You have personally championed the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall, which is now the subject of bills in both the Senate and the House, with support from state legislators around the country. Given the recent events in Ukraine, the escalating danger of a general war and even a thermonuclear war, how do you assess the significance of the Glass-Steagall fight in the United States and around the world? While headlines have been focused for the past weeks on the Ukraine crisis, where do you situate the Glass-Steagall fight in the global context of war avoidance, the collapsing Obama administration, and his desperate drives for greater and greater executive power?
Well, this comes pretty much the same thing, doesn't it? Pretty much the same kind of problem. That we have to actually find ways in which to induce our fellow citizens to understand things that they have never in general understood before. And that means that we have to think about the future of the planet as a whole. We have to think about science driver programs. Just as I said in my opening remarks today, it's the same thing. We must get out of the idiocy of believing that we cannot know what the future is. We have to not only what the future can be, we have to know how we can do it. That's the whole mission. That's mankind. That is the history of mankind. It's the essence of mankind. And the very fact that this question comes up in this way, it attests to the fact that mankind has gone stupid. From the greatest periods of fluorescence of science and so forth. And we have to say that to people. Stop being stupid. Now, you can say it as nicely as you can, but you have to make sure it's heard and given more than just passing consideration. Hostility, the green policy. The green policy is like a green, ugly cancer. It's creeping over the brain, eating it. And you say, where are the human beings? No, those are the monkeys. They're smarter. That's what's happened to us. Our educational system. Our educational is absolutely evil. We don't educate them, we train them. And without the challenge of creativity, what you would do, if you have an educational process, and we used to know about this, what you would do, that a good teacher would break the law, in a sense. The good teacher would give the students a little extra, spark them up, or even conduct post-class classes, or stimulate their education in ways beyond the standard education. And it was those teachers who did that who made possible progress. I mean, ingenious people who were out of the educational process, but who actually took extra time. People who in World War II would take people who had virtually little skill, like these poor women, housewives, who were out there making airplanes, bombers and so forth, and bring them up to the level of achievement, of challenge of achievement, and make sure they have the support needed to learn how to do this. And by giving them the experience of making discoveries, breaking through the barriers of standard education and making discoveries which beyond those standards. Say, look, you may not be trained in this, but we can train you in it. And that's what happened in the airport plants in California during World War II. Or building the tank factories in Michigan and areas around there. This was getting people to act under Franklin Roosevelt's leadership and the inspiration of his saving the population of the United States during the 1930s by his methods of defending the United States against the Republican Party, which was the great danger, the great threat. Woodrow Wilson and the Republican Party were the greatest danger that the United States in recent times ever suffered, up until recently. So the point is just that. The question is the methods of inspiration, which are not just talking at people to inspire them, but by putting them through the experience on which they themselves, oh, now I see what you mean. Huh? And it's that spark of drive, and that's what I think about this, also going back to her operation and his, Keisha's and his. That the point is by being the example, not just by teaching or directing, but being the example of the way you have to learn to think if you're going to break through the barriers, the obstacles, which get in our way of recovery. The important thing of doing everything we can about water in the western part of the United States is exactly that. We have limited abilities even now, even with the technology available to us and the lack of training of people for this kind of thing. But we're going to have to start it, because it's going to be at least an educational process with some immediate benefits. But the educational process itself will, as in the World War II operation by the United States, will stimulate people into wanting more. Once you infect people with creativity and make it infectious by some mission orientation, you can change a society which has gone bad, like our society now, and with great painstaking efforts, but are worth it, every bit of it. you inspire the population to reach a higher level of self-esteem and accomplishment than it would otherwise occur. That's the whole thing. That's the real.
Okay, this will be the final question for tonight. Lynn, as you uniquely have been saying, the dynamic which is driving the threat of world war today is the utter bankruptcy of the transatlantic system. And this transatlantic system has been sustaining itself for 50 years on the looting of the United States economies of Western Europe and beyond. It's now reached the phase of complete self-destruction through the move to bail-in and the attempt to loot the economies of Eurasia. If we can succeed in stopping this war drive, it means the end of the Wall Street, City of London system. Now, on Monday of this week, in your discussion with the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee, you stated the immediate need to convene a general international conference of the type that Franklin Roosevelt organized at the time of the Bretton Woods Conference and the founding of the United Nations. You said on Monday that the purpose of such a conference among the great powers, such as Russia, China, and the United States, would be to clear the deck of all imperial obligations among nations, to declare the absolute sovereignty of every nation which should be sovereign, and to look to the tasks which mankind as a species has to deal with the problems of Earth and the problems of nearby solar space. You also said that this is a new conception of what a United Nations program should be, and that it will save the human species because it will open the gates to do the kinds of things that we have to do to meet the needs of humanity now and the defense of humanity on Earth from the perils which come from above. Now, yesterday evening, in a discussion with your associates, you called for a national and international mobilization to implement a recovery program on this basis, driven by going to the highest technologies. And you stressed that the key to accomplishing this recovery is the return to an Abraham Lincoln greenback system as an application of the original Hamilton system of national credit. So I'd like you to please elaborate.
All right. What people think of as a banking system is actually a kind of intellectually suicidal incompetence. Hamilton understood something. We do not want a banking system. The banking system we have is generally worthless. And every bank which is associated with Wall Street should actually be shut down, because the debts which they represent in the organization of the Wall Street organization as such is such that you have to shut the whole thing down, because you cannot afford to spend anything on worthless money. By worthless money, it doesn't produce anything. It doesn't feed anybody. It doesn't clothe anybody, except those who should be naked, because they're not fit to wear clothes. And their nakedness should become apparent to everyone. This is a stupid person. That's why he's running the streets in the winter, naked. We compel him to do that, so that he may be reminded by the chill of his nakedness, may warn him that maybe he should change his ways and wear something which has reality to it, not mere money. Because the problem has been that we're so used to, and many of our presidents were corrupted on this. People hated Hamilton because he said it. Lincoln did it, and they killed him for it. He put the greenbacks. Well, what are the value of greenbacks? They ain't worth nothing. Oh, no, buddy, they're worth everything. You don't understand economics. And the problem I have even with our own organization is people don't understand. They try to think in terms of banking reform, which actually is going to be bunking reform. I don't mean sleeping. What we are going to have to do is go to a true system like a greenback system, because we are not going to pay a tribute to parasites. What we're going to do is we're going to create a system of national credit, which was the design of Alexander Hamilton. For various reasons, Hamilton's actual plan was never put into effect, except by Abraham Lincoln. The intention was there by earlier other presidents, earlier than Lincoln, in the case of Monroe. 2 terms of Monroe and John Quincy Adams. This was the greatest period of our existence, except for this wonderfully remarkable thing, Lincoln's thing, of course, but the remarkable thing that happened with John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was one of the first persons who revived an approach to the U.S. economy, along with Franklin Roosevelt's intention, but that was a real effort which would make Hamilton happy in terms of his policy on manufacturers. So the problem is that money has no intrinsic value. That's the secret of greenbacks. Money has no intrinsic value. What has value is what you produce. What you have value is the means by which you produce. What has value is the work done by people to do that. That's value. Now, we will often find that we pay like second-hand food. That's what it is. When you go to Wall Street for a bank loan, you're eating second-hand food. It's not nice. Well, why you do it? Right? So therefore, the idea is that the economy is going to grow in physical productivity per capita and per unit of time. And that was the policy of the American Revolution. That was the intention of Benjamin Franklin, for example. That was the intention of all of our greatest people. It was the intention of Monroe. It was the intention of John Quincy Adams. It was the intention of Abraham Lincoln. It was the intention of a lot of good presidents who were assassinated, just because they were good. And you had the British influence to come in and kill all the good presidents. Let us have our own instead. And that's what we got. Most of the presidents of the United States were not fit to be presidents. They were not fit for any significant office because they didn't understand what an economy is. An economy is a reproductive process in which the result of production today results in an increase in the productivity of people tomorrow. And it's on the basis of using inventions, discoveries, technological breakthroughs. These discoveries make the productive powers of man, increase their value. So the point is the economy must increase the productive power of the citizens. By educational systems, that's what the school systems do. They're supposed to produce students who can think, who know something. The work is to be improvement. Manual labor is not a very good idea. There are cases where what we call manual labor is very creative, like machine tool design is very creative. It is not the production itself, but it's something which is necessary for the production and for its productivity. Physical science, the improvement of physical science, always higher energy flux density. If you are not increasing the energy flux density of the process of production and economy in general, you should be thrown out of office, out of political office. You're not fit to run political office. Are you increasing the productive powers of labor? With the green policy, you're killing the human species. Anybody who's pulling a green policy should be put in the insane asylum or under supervision in lieu of letting them run loose on parole. But what are the habits? Drug addiction. Anyone who has money, drug addiction, you find everything. Everything they own, you find them of. And say, now you're going to have to go to work. We'll give you a little probation period to get rid of the drugs. But you ain't getting no money. You work, boy. We had that, once in one of the colonies, Virginia. Smith. You want to eat? You work. And you cannot jerk. You must work. And that's where we're at. The point is the idea that every person who's capable should base their life on doing something which, in effect, is a creative contribution to the future of mankind. such that one man's work consumed by another will enrich them both. And that's the principle of economy. So we don't want a money system where we say the bankers are going to decide what you're going to do with this money. Don't assume that money is wealth. It is not wealth. It's a means of exchange. And Hamilton made that very clear. We had banking systems like Franklin Roosevelt's. We had other kinds of that thing. But these were never really what was the intention was. The intention was not to have a banking system. The intention was to have a banking system, a medium of promotion, of increase of the productive powers of labor. The objective was always to take people who are less skilled and make them into people who are more skilled, to give them the training, the tools, the inspiration, and the auxiliary things, like health care and all these other things, to mean that this population today is going to be outdone in achievement by the population of tomorrow. And the human principle is to be part of that chain of progress. And that's what has to be, we have to have in the United States, in a crisis which is otherwise impossible to solve. If we tried to reorganize a financial reorganization of the United States based on the assumption that all people in banks had equal rights to have their banking protected. No. Where did their money come from? What did they do? What did they produce to improve the living standards of the people out there? No, they did the other thing. They robbed them. They looted them, especially when young Bush came into power. They looted our people. And they ask us now to honor their credit, to honor their incomes. They didn't earn anything. They made no contribution to mankind. Did they make people healthier, wealthier? What about the hospital system? What happened to the hospital system? Did they do that? No. They ruined everything. They made everything worse. And any member of Congress who supports these guys ought to be not a member of Congress anymore.
Well, I want to thank you, Lynn. That will bring a conclusion to our broadcast tonight. I guarantee you will see a lot more of Mr. LaRouche, both here on LaRouche PAC TV and elsewhere globally. So please stay tuned, and thank you for joining us tonight. Good night.